Think about that for a moment. If the police or some government, some aspect of the government, the United States government, decided they didn't like the video that I'm making right now, the recording that I'm making right now, and they send some corrupt police officer, and he throws a bag of marijuana over my fence, and then he rings my doorbell, and I get arrested on some trumped-up charge, or let's say, it's not a drug charge, let's say they give some hooker $100 to claim that I raped her, and the court actually falls for this. Or I don't even get a trial at all, because I can be detained indefinitely without trial or charge. And I go to prison on some sort of bogus charge, just like the people who have already been arrested under the indefinite detention bill. Who's really going to step in and actually do something about this? The indomitable will of the American people? No. The American people are the ones who are already suffering from this bill existing. If we were going to do something about it, it's either going to be until it's so bad that everyone is forced to do something about it, aka, when the poor have no food left, they will eat the rich. But until that happens, we become complacent enough that we're just going to loaf around and sacrifice as many of our own people as we need to maintain this illusion of our security, which is kind of like sacrificing to the gods to make the sun rise again tomorrow. It's not really all that different. We're still sacrificing people either way. So what would I do? How is this relevant to what I would do in a given situation if I had my way with American foreign policy and was allowed to run amok with it? Well, this is relevant because what we do is we like helping people in a superficial sense more than actually helping them in a practical sense. And we impose restrictions on this ground, on our military, on our foreign policy, on the people who are actually tasked with the job of improving a situation, of going and doing something. And we impose these ridiculous rules onto them that, in short, if you look at only the practical way of looking at them, and not the superficial, the rules say the American military must superficially improve the situation, even if it comes at the cost of practically improving the situation. This is our war policy. This is our foreign policy. That is the rule the American military currently has to operate under. You will kill people in the name of maintaining our illusion, or you're a bad American, or you're a disloyal military. So what would my foreign policy be? Well, if I fully explained my own ideals on foreign policy, my own ideology, and what I think would be the best for the world, that would take several hours to explain. But in a nutshell, in regards to Uganda, or if, say, I was given the task of fixing Africa and had the entire American military at my disposal with which to do it, and nobody got in my way like those politicians, well, first thing I'd do is I'd get rid of these superficial gains and look at only practical gains. The fact is that in order to properly maintain a war and properly maintain military deployments, especially if I'm making lots of them to fix not just Uganda, but other countries, other regions in Africa, or all over the world, this isn't free. And a lot of people seem to think that it's the American military's responsibility to provide these services for free. After all, people claimed war for oil when we went into Iraq, and not everyone seems to be able to understand that wars cost money. Things cost money. And these engagements aren't free. There are ways to profit off of the situation without bankrupting and destroying the entire economy of the country that you are currently occupying. In fact, there was a very easy method open for use in Iraq, but no one would touch it because it caused negative publicity. So, in reality, a lot of the current national debt that we have from funding the war, which basically went onto a big credit card, is not the fault of specific politicians. It's the fault of the American people for saying, we want the war on a credit card. We don't want it paid for. If you make it a paid-for war, we're not going to vote for you, because we would rather put it on a credit card. The American people rose up. The insurmountable will of the people rose up and demanded that our national debt be increased. And we have no one to blame but ourselves for this stupid, stupid decision. So the first thing that would happen is that I would make sure the war, all of our wars, all of our military deployments all over the world, wherever they are properly funded. And that's usually going to be by taking resources in the area that we're invading. And you might have some of the more ignorant people who say, well, you're just taking advantage of and exploiting the people that you're doing whatever with. Well, what alternative do you have? What alternative do you have that you're willing to present to us that would actually be something that we could sustain to fix a large portion of the world, or indeed the entire world? Resources are not unlimited. If you think this is a bad thing and think it's right to criticize someone for it, what would you do? What is your alternative solution? Because if you don't have one, your criticism doesn't mean anything. So, if I was suddenly looking at Africa for how to fix it, one of the first things I'd be doing is looking at the natural resources that I could take to fund the war. And there are ways to do this without bankrupting the country that you're in. It just requires a little bit of economic savvy, which apparently we didn't have for use in Iraq. Or at least we weren't allowed to use it in Iraq. But regardless of the reason, the Iraq war cost a lot of money, more than it should have, regardless of whatever the real reason is behind it. So that'd be the first thing I'd address. How much is the war going to cost? And how can we wage it in an economic manner that will allow us to profit off of this situation? Because there's no reason we shouldn't profit off of these wars, off of these military deployments. People assume that profit equals bad, profit equals malice, profit equals evil and sin, money is the root of all evil. When in fact this isn't true. Money does not necessarily have to be associated with destroying the economy of the country. In fact, it's often quite the opposite. Usually, if you want to build infrastructure in a country, you have to properly set up businesses and jobs and incomes for people. And this requires a for-profit model. And this is so frequently stigmatized that even people who are willing to actually fix the situation and do more good than charities would do are not allowed to do their job because profit equals bad in the minds of so many people. So if I were managing a war, we would be profiting off of it. If I were managing the American military, we would be going to military deployments and quote-unquote wars, even though the Iraq engagement is more of an occupation, not an actual war, but people like to refer to it as a war. We'd be going to quote-unquote war on almost a liberal basis because they could fix a lot of these problems that are going on around the world today. But we'd be profiting off of it. We'd be making money off of it. Usually, when a country occupies another country, they get lots and lots and lots of money. And there are ways to do this without destroying that country's economy or damaging it. And this just hasn't happened in the Iraq War. Isn't that strange? That's very, very strange in the grand scheme of things. Everyone seems to think wars cost so much money, but people don't draw the connection between wars cost money. How did we sustain World War II? How did we fund World War II? It was a very long war. The war lasted years. We spent lots of money on it. How did we not completely bankrupt our entire economy in World War II? And not everyone can figure out this question. What's different in the Iraq War? Not everybody can figure this out. So people may ask as a result of that, what gives you the right to go to some other country and take resources from them, even though you're not actually damaging their economy if you do it properly? What gives you the right to impose your occupation on another group of people and to forcibly alter the way they live? Who gave you the right? Well, that's not really an important question now, is it? That's something that people ask because they want to feel like they're doing something good, but in fact they don't really accomplish much by asking this question, because it's not the correct question. The real question is not who will let me do something or who will authorize me to do something. It's who will stop me from doing something. Might makes right. The ends justify the means. This is not a matter of opinion. This is the way the world works. There have been many cases where countries that are still around today, the United States including, have done terrible things, but because they won the engagement, they were never held accountable. The United States, for example, if we're not going to look at World War II, because that's cliché at this point, we can look at the genocide on the Indians. We can also look at the Philippine deployment that we had a little over 100 years ago. Some pretty nasty stuff took place there. You know something else? Adolf Hitler, his final solution, quote-unquote, the name that he got for his plan to exterminate the Jews was taken from us. It was taken from the United States because we had been doing similar things and we were never held accountable because we won. The fact of the matter is that a good person's good morals or good code of ethics or code of honor is not going to save them, and it's not going to save their nation. We live in a world where might makes right, and the ends justify the means. And that is not a matter of opinion, it is a fact, and we cannot suddenly pretend that it is not a fact because we want to feel good about ourselves. And when we do play the pretend game, that we're somehow good and we try to pretend to wage warfare more ethically, often what happens is we make the situation even worse than it otherwise would have been. So what I would do is I would dispel this illusion. Let's say I became powerful in the United States. One of the first things I'd probably do is work on the educational system and make critical thinking something that's taught more heavily, and impose history books that haven't been altered and edited to remove all the nasty stuff that we've done. And I'd make it something that people learn at an earlier age. But that's a different topic entirely, the educational system. But the point is, I would dispel these illusions, the illusion of complacency that has been grasping so many people. So I'd do things that a lot of people perceive to be unethical, simply because they were more practical. And the main issue with that is that I would make sure that wars were profitable, that we made money off of our many military deployments and engagements. Now be honest, if I was running for president on those grounds, would you vote for me or vote against me? If this was the only piece of the argument that you were given access to in terms of information. Would you vote for me or vote against me? Now, if you are someone who would vote against me, consider why not. Consider leaving a comment on this video, and say why not. But not just why not, because your opinion, your criticism holds no value unless you have an alternative solution. So I leave you with this question. What would you do if you were given control over the United States military and were allowed to address the situation like Mr. Kony? How would you make sure these situations got resolved? What would you do, and how would these methods be different from my methods? Why is yours more ethical than mine is? Why is yours more practical than mine is? Consider leaving a comment on those grounds, because just saying that I'm a sociopath and I'm a warmonger isn't really going to accomplish anything, now is it? I'll see you next time.